Um, I'm George, and this is Terry, just so that you know. So good evening. So George Baker is my name, and together with my colleagues Terry Crow and Julie Williams, we're here to present an overview of the Wildern Local Nature Reserve in Hedge End, particularly the events of the last 4 years. We will be speaking for about 40 minutes and would welcome any questions that you've got at the end of the presentation. So, firstly, who are we? Well, as I've said, we are the Friends of Wildern Local Nature Reserve. We're a voluntary group, and there's about 500 members that we have. Our main objective is to protect, enhance and expand the local nature reserve in Wildern. We work in partnership with Hedge End Town Council, who are the landowners, and we work closely with other local groups. Now, why are we here today? Well, we're here for a number of reasons: to introduce you to our group and our local nature reserve, to update you on the progress that we've made in the last 4 years, to show you some of the biodiversity found on our reserve. Terry will be doing that in the second part of this presentation, and also to seek your active support in our activities. So, what have we achieved since we obtained LNR status in 2019? The first thing is raise the awareness of the councils. And when I say the councils, I'm talking about Eastleigh Borough Council and Hedge End Town Council, and the local community, of the importance of Wildern Local Nature Reserve to the local biodiversity and also the public. We've created a Friends of group, and there's about 480 members of and we have a very active Facebook page and about 200 followers on our Twitter account, and another 20 or so members who are not Facebook persons, so we communicate with them via emails. And we produce newsletters on a regular basis and send them out to the council officials and any of our local supporters, plus our members, of course. Now, we've also completed extensive habitat enhancement works, primarily with the Hedge End conservation volunteers. Now, that work has been carried out particularly at Coltsfoot Pond, Goodall's Meadow Pond, Wildern Moor and Valley Mire. And they are just names that we will show you a little later in the presentation, main zone names that we will come back to. So I'll provide you with more information about that a little bit later. So continuing on our theme, what have we achieved? We have completed extensive monitoring and recording activities. And again, Terry will be covering much of this in his presentation, covering many hundreds of species. And these, when they've been recorded, have been forwarded to many county and national databases. Our current numbers are about 670 invertebrates, including 22 species of dragonflies, 28 species of butterflies, 98 hoverflies. Our bird species list stands at 74. and our flowering plant list is up over 300. Another thing we do is to provide guided tours of the reserve to the councillors, who I should tell you are always impressed with what they found. And unfortunately for many of them, it's the first time they've been on the reserve. We also include their officials. So there's the Eastleigh Borough and Hedge End Town Council officials, plus group members. And then also, and finally in this section, we have submitted an expansion proposal to the councils to increase the land area of the local nature reserve by 40%. And I will give you a little bit more information about that as we go through. So here is the reserve. It's a 10-hectare reserve, and it's located in the centre of Hedge End. Here is Hedge End Village. Many of you will know that. And here is the M27 junction. We have, this is a retail park, Next and others, many of you will know. But you can see we are totally surrounded by housing estates, totally surrounded. So we've got a biodiversity hotspot completely surrounded by housing estates. These are the zones. We have 8 zones on the reserve, and during the talk, I'll highlight some of the work that we have carried out in the main areas. So I'll make reference to Coltsfoot Pond, which is in here. That's in Wildern Lane, close to the school. We have this area here, which is actually labelled Coltsfoot Paddock, but its name is Wildern Moor. And then also up here, Hogstye Copse, and we'll talk about the Valley Mire in there. So those are the 3 areas that I'll be talking to you about, and where we've done the most work in the recent years. Now, there are a number of woodlands here that are not included in the reserve currently, and they are included in our proposal to extend the reserve. So we have woodland here, here, and here, and a little bit there. So those land parcels are owned by Eastleigh Borough Council and were excluded from the original application because Hedge End Town Council would only submit an application to cover the land that they owned. So our proposal is for Eastleigh Borough Council to transfer the land ownership to Hedge End Town Council, who could then include it under the management plan and hence include it into the local nature reserve. So that's our proposal. It's currently being considered by both councils, and we hope to get a positive outcome in the coming weeks and months. So to put the reserve in perspective, the population of Hedge End is 22,500 and growing. The number of houses, residences is almost 10,000 and growing. The land area of Hedge End is over 700 hectares, but the local nature reserve is 10 hectares. So everything is expanding in Hedge End except the nature. Now, I'd like to say a few words about the Eastleigh Borough Council Biodiversity Action Plan. Now, this action plan is a fine document. We've read it many times. We sing its praise often. Now, it's based on the concept of 10 biodiversity areas and 15 biodiversity priority links or wildlife corridors. To give you an example, here is a biodiversity area down here. There's others that are here. And then linking them together are these wildlife corridors or biodiversity links. Now, this is Wildern Local Nature Reserve just here. Can I just ask, can you see the pointer? Yeah. You can, okay, good. So here is Wildern Local Nature Reserve, and this is the proposed link joining the areas, the hotspot areas over here and over here. It's a fine concept, and here it is described. I can't read all of it because of the pictures, but the concept is good. We thoroughly support the idea. Unfortunately, this plan has been in place since 2012 and has never been implemented. Never been implemented. So while all the concepts are there and written down as plans, it has never been implemented, and we are really disappointed because our small area here, in theory, is part of a corridor, and none of that is in place. So longer term, these are the things that we will continue to be lobbying for. Going back to the reserve, Wildern Local Nature Reserve is primarily a wetland. And the reason for that is we have water courses that run down from the Golf driving range and beyond, down right the way through the reserve. We have a pond here, Hogstye, right the way through the reserve, down under the road and into Goodalls. It feeds the pond here, and then it dissipates into a wet woodland here, across the moor, down past Coltsford Pond, and then across to the Hamble River, which is just here, and that runs down through to Botley into the Solent. Likewise, there is another watercourse that is fed by springs, we believe, that runs right the way through the reserve, right the way down, and likewise ends up in the Hamble River. And so therefore, the habitat is largely affected by these watercourses, and we believe that the majority of it is a wetland classification. Historically, this land was, the majority of it, particularly around here, was farmland. However, it hasn't been farmed in many years, and the woodlands have now taken hold in many areas. Now, much of our habitat enhancement work is carried out in conjunction with the Hedge End Conservation Volunteers Group. They have work sessions most months, supervised by Hedge End Town Council, and they have a whole range of different works suitable for all persons. And if you're interested at all, you can register your details on the website and then be included in their register, and they would then provide you with details of the work sessions that are held and how to get to them. So what I'm going to do now is to give you a little bit more detail on some of the projects that the conservation group and ourselves are working on. The first one is Coltsfoot Balancing Pond. Now, this is a man-made pond that holds water throughout the year, even during the warmest summers that we've had. It's the focal point for many of the beautiful dragonflies that we get recorded on the reserve, and Terry will show you some of those in his presentation. Now, our aim for this pond is to obtain a suitable balance of native and introduced plants, but also adequate light to support the wide range of biodiversity that we find in the area. Here is another view of the pond, and this one shows the encroachment of the reed mace, of the pickerel weed, here, and also not easily seen on this photograph, but the parrot's feather weed. Now, many of the overhanging trees around this side, and in fact the other side, have been removed to increase the light levels and also to reduce the sediment levels in the pond caused by falling leaves. Now, we've put hundreds of work hours into this pond to achieve a suitable balance, and the results are very rewarding, and as Terry will show you in his presentation. The next area is Wildern Moor. Now, this is our biological hotspot. Now, it's originally part of Wildern Farm, and it contains a variety of habitat, including flooded meadows, unimproved grassland, purple moor grass, and ponds. And our aim with Wildern Moor is to reduce the woodland encroachment and manage the grass levels for the benefit of the large number of amphibians and invertebrate that live and breed in the moor. Now, here is Fern and Kirsten. These are our key workers for this area. We've given them a break this year, but they have been in residence through the summer months in the last 2 or 3 years, and they do much of our heavy lifting for us in this area. And the end result is, during the spring and summer months, we get a flush of a whole range of fantastic wildflowers. And there you can see some of them. We're really pleased and very, very pleased with the amount of flowers that we get. Our next area of habitat enhancement is the Valley Mire in Hogstye Corner. Our aim here is to prevent woodland encroachment and create a woodland glade to safeguard the sedges and grasses in the area. Now, this photograph was taken in November 2018, before the start of work in the area. Ta-da! And here we have the end result. We're really pleased with this area. We've got ourselves a nice woodland glade, lots of light. The grasses and sedges have come back, the willow that we removed, you can see the odd piece of here that's still there, but the majority of the willow that we removed has been used to create dead hedges, which in turn are creating good habitat for invertebrate in the area. So it's not the finished product, but it's really moved on. Now, what lives and grows in our reserve? Now, the monitoring, recording, and reporting of the biodiversity in the reserve is absolutely essential for what we're doing. Only when we know what lives and grows in our reserve can we effectively decide on the management and maintenance of the habitat that we need to protect and enhance the biodiversity. So we need to continue with our monitoring and recording activities. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Terry, who will provide you with more details of our monitoring activities.
Okay, thanks very much, George. George, by the way, like myself, is retired, of course. He was many a year overseas working for some power company or other. And myself, I'm a retired underwriter. But George is a lifelong birder, so that's his background in terms of a link to wildlife. Mine isn't so definite. I've always liked ponds, because my dad had ponds in Southampton. And from that, I've got interested in dragonflies and birds. But since I retired 4 years ago, my interest in nature and my understanding of nature is exploded, really. Yeah, I'll stop there. So here are some of the areas that George has touched on. Coltswood Pond, as George mentioned, was a balancing pond created for runoff from the estates around the reserve. And when it was cut off, or rather when it was created, it was cut off from one of those streams, which probably explains why there are still sticklebacks in Coltswood Pond. It was probably part of a fen meadow with a stream running through it. And yeah, I think there are remnants of the life that used to be there in today's version. But yeah, Coltswood Pond as a balancing pond is unusual in that not many balancing ponds do, as George said, have water throughout the year. It's got a huge drawdown zone, so a lot of it is quite shallow. It doesn't seem to be spring fed as far as we know. There's no stream going into it, so it is water capture, but at the same time it's a bit of a puzzle that it doesn't actually lose a lot of depth even in the, you know, as George said, the hottest summers, the driest summers. I can tell you from first-hand experience just this last week that it's fairly deep. And how can I tell you that? Well, I was over here, I saw some cans, plastic bottles just over here where the reed mace had died down. I thought, I know, I'm going to whip that out. And I've got wellies, no problem. Carefully moved in to snatch these bits of rubbish out. I thought very carefully, testing each step as I went, but then found myself sinking somewhat to a point where water was flowing into my wellies, and I continued to sink. And I can tell you that it is up to your arse in terms of the depth, which is good news in a way. It wasn't for me at the time, perhaps, but it's good news because although we haven't found any evidence of breeding toads, at least we've got a pond which is big enough to support them. On the point of toads, apart from toads spawned in my own Wildern garden about a decade ago, which I don't think was fertilised because none of it took, we've only recorded one toad, and that was in the moor adjacent under a tin, and that was about 2 years ago. So, you know, I think that represents the nature of things with an urban reserve. A lot of the life, apart from the efforts of the likes of Phil Budd at the earlier part of the century, we won't know what we used to have in this area, that we've lost. And in a similar vein, we can't tell you what we've gained that wasn't here before, if there are such species. Well, I know there are a few. But so that's a story in and of itself. It's an inadvertent creation of a brilliant habitat. That's what it boils down to. Here we're looking at what's called the Valley Mire. I mean, it was called a Valley Mire by Eastleigh Borough Council's head of Ranger Service, Richard Mould Ryan. He said it may not be a Valley Mire in the technical sense because you'd have to have so many feet of peat. It certainly has got peat, but how deep it is, we just don't know. But, you know, as George said, the nature of the area is wetland. So over the longest period of time, you can imagine that peat could have been laid down. This area here, George didn't touch on, is Gully Mead. Now, this is where the other stream comes through. If you know Hedge End at all, you've got Upper Northern Road at the end, a little bit further beyond some housing. And then beyond that, you've got the motorway. And somewhere up there, the spring starts, and there are actually flushes throughout this area here, and so it's great. You've got a natural wetland. Again, it never dries up, and that probably explains where we get the likes of the beautiful demoiselle damselfly. George mentioned about Wildern Moor. It was renamed Wildern Moor because it was called Coltsfoot Paddock, just because it was next to Coltsfoot Close. And I suppose because it was enclosed, although it's never held horses as far as we know. Wildern Moor, because that's the name of the area, it's from a Norman guy, de Wildern, who presumably was granted it hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So you've got a historical link. And more because Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust on the Isle of Wight explained the meaning of the word moor for a new nature reserve there. And back in the Middle Ages, moor meant a watery pasture or some such term that is grazed by cattle, and that's exactly what this is. So it kind of fitted, and it sounds, I think, a bit more interesting than Coltsfoot Paddock. So there's a bit more background as to why we've got some interesting wildlife. Now, George said we have 22 dragonfly species recorded. We do. This only says 21. I only semi-count the one that we don't have a photograph of, which is the brown hawker. One of these days, hopefully, we will get a picture of it. I'm pretty sure I've seen one myself, but I wouldn't have recorded it. The black-tailed skimmer was one I wasn't familiar with before I embarked on this adventure. But to me, it's quite an exciting, largest insect to encounter. But the largest is the emperor dragonfly. It's the largest dragonfly we have in the UK, and here it is having a nice old munch on the head of a wasp. That was in, these are both in Wildern Moor, actually, these photos. Incidentally, Wildern Moor has got a stream running through it, but it's very diffuse. You can just about see a trickle even after it's rained quite heavily. Again, that's another excellent feature for a wildlife reserve. More dragonflies. You might have guessed that dragonflies really are my thing. Now, Phil Budd, 2001 or something of that order, recorded the emerald damselfly as one of a few dragonflies that he found on his forays from Southampton. We only ever find one or two each year. Now, that may be my lack of observation skills. It it may be because there are only one or two. I suspect there are a few more and I just don't catch them at the right time, even though I'm out there quite a lot of the time. Pleased to say we found a female this last season, which was a first. The keeled skimmer, this is a scarce species, as you probably know. We've only ever found two. This was in 2019, this male in Coltswood Pond. Oh, sorry. We found a teneral female by Goodall's Pond last season. So that would imply that it's breeding locally. But again, just those two examples. On the other hand, the golden ringed dragonfly, this one here, which you can, the black and yellow one, this is our longest species of dragonfly in the UK. We long suspected that this has been, it breeds locally, but we've always been told Southampton's lucky as a city because it's the only city where you'll see golden ringed dragonflies because they come over from the New Forest. So we've got these hordes of golden ringed dragonflies populating the area apparently. On one day last summer, in different parts of the reserve, distinct individuals, I recorded 6 golden ringed dragonflies. But we hadn't got proof of breeding. There's a fellow wildlife photographer out there now called Andy Binns. And I said, look, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to find proof of breeding. And lo and behold, he nearly did that in the sense that he got a photograph of a golden ringed dragonfly female spraying its eggs into the woodland carr come stream just behind Goodall's Pond. So we've got probable proof of breeding, which, you know, that I think that's a strong, what's the word I'm looking for? That's a good thing for the reserve, good indicator of our biodiversity. Now, this one here is my favourite so far. Christine Whiffen, you may have heard of her. She does some fantastic photography, mostly of birds, but she's hot on dragonflies too. And she comes over to Wildern Local Nature Reserve from time to time. And she said to me, Terry, I think I've got a ruddy darter in the in Wildern Moor. She wasn't swearing, of course. There is a ruddy darter, and we do have records of that. But when she put it up, she thought, no, that's not a ruddy darter. And yeah, it was confirmed it is, in fact, in this case, a female red-veined darter. Again, fresh off the press, so to speak. So that would imply that it's come out locally. We couldn't say for sure that it's from Wildern Moor, which is where this one was found, or from adjacent Coltswood Pond. But we were told by British Dragonfly Society experts that this was the first second generation red-veined darter found in the UK last year. This was in August. And to my knowledge, there were hardly a handful found in the UK, a second generation, all 2022, in the latter part of the season where you would get second generation. So again, that puts us on the map. We'll have to see what happens this year, but you know. And this was an exciting event for me. Doesn't look much. It's a damselfly, clearly. It's a red damselfly, but it's the small red damselfly. The large red are out and about now. We've got numbers already around Coltswood Pond. I've seen the first couple in Wildern Moor today. The small red comes out later in the year, but it is a local and rare species. It's very sedentary. It doesn't travel far. It only likes full sun. It doesn't like windy weather. So the hotspot, and there are very, very few hotspots in the UK, is the New Forest. So did it travel over? Well, the books would say it probably didn't, but on the other hand, insects and wildlife in general doesn't tend to follow the rules. However, this one was found not on a sunny day, but on an overcast day on the edge of Coltswood Pond. The ideal habitat is probably more likely Wildern Moor, but it's the only photographic record in South Hampshire this side of the Solent. So yeah, I'm very pleased with that, but we need to find more than one. They've got a 2-year life cycle. If they've got a very small colony here, perhaps we'll see some more this year because this was taken in 2020. So all to play for on that front. This one turned up in 2020 as well, the Downy Emerald. I'm afraid it's a one-off. I know that at Swanwick Lakes, they have quite a few of these Downy Emeralds, so it could have just been a visitor from there. But again, you know, things change, and some of these dragonflies are expanding, so their range. So hopefully we'll see some this year. You can't get enough of the beautiful demoiselle as far as I'm concerned, and that's a nail. As I say, we see this throughout the reserve, and that reflects that we've got streams running through the reserve. Moving on to the amphibians and reptiles, actually we've got 6. This needs updating. I'm not sure which one the 6 is, but I mentioned the toad already. We've only seen one in recent years, and that was 2019. Yeah, slow worms, they're seen in all zones of the reserve. Frogs, we have literally thousands of. Common lizard, mainly Wildern Moor. They do spill over into a couple of other zones, Coltswood Pond area and Goodall's Meadow. Now, unfortunately, Buddy here, this is the cat's name, has a common lizard in his mouth. The urban predator is not the common lizard. Just want to emphasize that. It didn't end well for this common lizard. The resident who owns Buddy said he brought the lizard into their house, but it didn't make it, sad to say. However, we do have a lot of common lizards. So here's a molehill in Wildern Moor, and there are actually 9 common lizards in this one photo. How many we've got overall, I don't know. Paul Baker does regular surveys of our reptiles. So he will record numbers, but you're only going to see a small proportion at any one time. And I wouldn't be surprised if we are getting on for 1,000 in Wildern Moor. Might sound like a big number, but when you get your eye in and you see them all over the moor, you think, well, there's got to be that sort of number in the end. Frogs, again, we have so many clumps of frog spawn, upwards of 500 in the moor alone, that means there's got to be 1,000 frogs. And I think that situation is possibly improving despite the predators that they attract. Rarely do you see slow worms out and about in the open, at least I don't. I've only seen 2 or 3 in the 4 years I've been out there most days looking. Of course, it would be mainly the summer months that they'd be about. But this one again is in Wildern Moor, and as you can see is on sphagnum moss. And going back to the idea of the Valley Mire, I think parts of Wildern Moor might be, because it really does have what you would recognise to be a peat bog in a small part of it. In a way, George should be commenting on this as a bird, but here are examples of some of the birds that we see. The spotted flycatcher was a new one to me. We've had them 3 successive years, always in Wildern Moor again. 2 years ago, I recorded half a dozen at a time, and that's very unusual apparently. You just don't get that sort of number, unfortunately, because of the decline of the species. We've got several colonies of house sparrow, and we get a dozen or so, maybe a few more redwings each year. Kingfisher turned up and was quite, well, maybe it's a reflection of the urban nature of the reserve, that wildlife does become accustomed to seeing people. And this one didn't seem to be too fussed if you had about 3 or 4 people with cameras being pointed at it over the last months of 2022. It was there fairly regularly, probably a youngster. And who knows, hopefully be back again. But again, that's because we have fish in Coltswood Pond, and we do have sticklebacks, but we also have rudd. And the occasional goldfish gets put in there, but they're usually predated fairly quickly by the grey heron or the water rail that we found that we've got. Talking of which, let me just play this. You can see some of the frog spawn here in one of the 2 main ponds in Wildern Moor. We had piles of dead frogs year before last. So I put this trail cam up to find out what it might be. Thought it would be rats, foxes, magpies, that sort of thing. But this is the prime suspect, because the way they've been piled up, you can see that they've been not dissected as such, but picked at. And if you imagine the water rail spiking its prey and then just picking out the bits that it wants, that's exactly what seems to have happened. You imagine it getting one, then going off a little bit, putting it in its pile and taking the bits that it wants. Anyway, that was a turn up for the books. It's not a rare species, but you don't often see it. It's quite elusive. So that was, another plus for the reserve. On to butterflies, 28, as George mentioned. Here are some of the pretty ones. I love a marbled white myself. Small copper really is, so unless you get a photo, you don't really appreciate it, not with my eyesight anyway. And of course, the painted lady, that's a very strong flyer. It does travel many hundreds of miles on its journey northwards. Yeah, we get a few of those. And of course, they do breed once they're over here. We're not really sure what happens after that, whether they get back. That's the purple hair streak. We do well for purple hair streaks. I've talked to people over the last few years who said they spent the last decade looking for one. And I'm thinking, I have one come down in my garden. I've seen half a dozen this year just pop down in front of me. So we're blessed. We've got a lot of oak trees, which is their habitat. And although they stay up in the trees mostly, if it's hot, they'll come down to get water. So I guess if you have a hot, dry summer and you've got a lot of watery places, you're bound to see them. Chalk Hill Blue really isn't one that you'd expect to see, but I'm told by Jane Chapman, who used to work for Butterfly Conservation, that the males leave their breeding site and travel northwest. So that would mean that we've got this one that's come from presumably the Isle of Wight and come down in Wildern Moor again, seeing suitable habitat to feed on before it moves on. I mean, if it were to breed, that would be something else, but I don't think that's very likely. So yeah, we've actually got 99 recorded species of hoverfly now. 99 in the sense that we've either taken them to species or they're in the genus and, you know, we haven't got any others that it could be confused with. But that said, we've got plenty of Kylosia, Platychirus, another genus, which I'm not sure if it's genii, but anyway, that would mean we've actually know that we've got more than 100. We just can't identify them. And as with so many of these small critters, you have to dissect their genitalia to understand what species it is. And I just can't get my head around that. Why is it this particular part of the anatomy which makes them stand out so much? But hey, what do I know? And I don't have a microscope, and I don't think I'm going to be going down that road in the near future. Who knows? So yeah, 3 hoverflies. Volucella zenaria is the largest hoverfly in the UK. When the previous Eastleigh Biodiversity Action Plan was drawn up, that was noted as a priority species, but now it's common as muck. It's one of those that's migrated from the continent and is the climate change presumably just taken off. Now, this is one of my favourites. Its name suggests something Jurassic, the bog microdon. Now, it's a combination of 2 species, Myrmica mutabilis, simply because it's one of those you can't tell the difference. And in this case, unless you actually find the pupae in the ant's nest, and apparently, if you get a picture of the pupae, you can identify whether it's Myrmica or mutabilis. Now, the point is, Myrmica, which I think is what this is, only lives in, boggy areas, in wetlands, which is what we've got. Whereas the other one lives in areas with limestone pavements, which we don't have for hundreds of miles. And yet we aren't going to be able to record it as such. Still, it is recorded as this. It is a rare species. It's another one of our rare species. It's another local rare. Incidentally, Moor Green Meadows up the road have recorded them as well in the last year. Here's a few others. Honeysuckle sawfly is quite a spectacular looking insect. probably honeysuckle sawfly, because there's another insect which looks very similar. The heather shield bug, that's another uncommon species. We don't have any heather locally, but we do have moorland, and I suppose in some respects that habitat substitutes. An example of a larger soldier fly. Okay, thanks. Now this is breaking news, really. We've recorded the silver kernel soldier fly. This is a female for the last 3 years. It's a rare species, possibly becoming more common. But we recorded this one on the 27th of March this year. That's the earliest UK record ever. So yeah, we're on the map with that one as well. Where I live is in the middle of the reserve. So if you imagine it shaped like a lobster, a body and 2 claws, well, I'm in the middle of the 2 claws in front of the head. So anybody who lives in that sort of area, I think should be looking at their property if they're interested in wildlife as an extension to the reserve. But this is a species you wouldn't expect to find in the wild. This one wasn't exactly in the wild, it was in my compost bin. It's quite big, and as soon as you see it, you know it's something different. It's called just a house centipede, but you know, it does have a sting. But it's not, its sting isn't as bad as the native species, so I wouldn't get too worried about it. It's just that it's got such big legs that it looks much bigger and more scary. It's uncommon, it's becoming more common, so you might want to just keep an eye out for that. Yeah, flowering plants. Now, to be honest, I'm only now beginning to get into plants. Yeah, and so my knowledge on plants is a bit limited, shall we say. But here we go, yellow loosestrife. This is why we get the scarce yellow loosestrife bee. Devil's bit scabious. We have very little of this. We have 1 patch, maybe 60 flowering heads. We really could do with a lot more Wildern Moor, because maybe we would get the marsh fritillary. Now you think, well, there aren't any here, are there? However, Moor Green Meadows, which is spitting distance, recorded a marsh fritillary last year, and it's been accepted on iRecord now. Took a long time, but the problem was apparently many people, or some people I should say, have it take it upon themselves to breed marsh fritillary and then release them. Yeah, so you know, theoretically that could have happened. Southern marsh orchid, no other orchids. Perhaps spotted orchid is in a neighbour's garden naturally, so yeah, but we haven't found it within the reserve. Going on to mammals, roe deer, occasional and becoming fewer. Nocturnal bat, we get them we record them in the day quite a lot, you know, in January, December, January, February, in the daytime, a nice sunny day, and they come out. Wildern Moor is the hotspot for that again, because there will be insects. The same reason why we see common lizards in January and February in Wildern Moor. They come out because it's sunny, there are insects. So we've got some habitats which have sheltered dispositions, sunny dispositions, and you know, we benefit from that too. Good to see a hedgehog out in the wild. And similarly with this fox, I missed the one of one sleeping once. Oh, I kicked myself because there it was asleep in front of me, but I was just trampling through and missed the shot. Now, yeah, that's Muggins here. All our records, bar 1 or 2, are with photographs. So we've got 11, and also, except for the ones that HBIC have recorded on the plant side, Wildern Moor recorded 100 plants, and the ecologist described it as a cracking site. But otherwise, it's work done through people photographing what they see, mainly. Trail camera has played a small part. The moth trap, we're going to look at setting that up again this year. And bat detector, again, it doesn't really take us much further forward in our knowledge at the moment. So, you know, the main thing is that we do photography, and but we could do with other people's expertise in actually rummaging around a bit more invasively, perhaps. I personally don't want to go down the road of netting insects and sending them off to be dissected. But, you know, if there were experts locally, then that wouldn't be such a problem. I think if I did it, it would just be a waste of insects. And to end, George has already mentioned that we want to get people supporting us, lobbying the council to improve or to extend the area. Monitoring, I've just talked about, habitat management activities. Now that includes litter picking. We now have numbers of people in the area who litter pick. I actually pull out a lot of rubbish from the reserve on a daily basis, but the majority of it is historic, quantity and quality. As I say, the size and the number of items. So that's a good thing, isn't it? Because, you know, we're by Wildern School, we're surrounded by estates, you know. We feel quite proud that we've actually made a difference in that respect. So anybody can do that anywhere that they are. It doesn't have to be in the locality. But yeah, if you are in the locality, come and support us and join Hedge End Conservation Volunteers if you are local and that way inclined. The more the merrier. And why not get your camera out and start taking photographs in your garden if you don't already do that? And I'm sure you'll find once you get into it, you'll be hooked. And then come over and share your expertise with us in supporting our discovery of new creatures. We have a Facebook group. It's a public group. You don't have to join, but you're welcome to join. You can upload your photos. They don't have to be from Wildern. But if you're in the area, why not? You know, if you've got something to share that's worthwhile sharing, go for it. And Julie runs our Twitter account, and that's building up its numbers. I'm not sure what the latest is. Julie might be able to tell you in a moment. Yeah, and I think I've probably gone over my time, so I'll stop and thank you for your time and invite questions.